The woman knelt on the dusty ground of the market, her knees sinking into mud mixed with spilled fruit and broken hope. Her clothes hung loose on her thin body, and in her arms were two small boys, twins clinging to her as if she were the last safe place on earth. Their eyes were tired, their faces were hungry. Then a black luxury car stopped. The crowd shifted. A man stepped out, tall, powerful, frozen in place. His breath caught the moment he saw the children, because they looked exactly like him. And the woman raising them, she was the wife he buried 5 years ago. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if stories of truth, karma, and second chances move your heart, don't forget to subscribe. Bernard Asiedu lived in a house so large it echoed even when he was alone. Every morning, sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling glass windows, washing over marble floors, expensive furniture, and walls decorated with art he never truly looked at. From the outside, his life appeared perfect: wealth beyond measure, influence across West Africa, a name that opened doors before he even knocked. But inside, Bernard carried a silence that no amount of money could fill. 5 years earlier, his wife Caroline Asiedu had died. That was the word everyone used. Died. Short, final, convenient. The official story said it was a tragic accident on a rainy night. Her car had gone off the road. The river had swallowed everything. The body was never found, but the doctors signed the papers and the law accepted it. A funeral was held with an empty casket. Tears were shed. Life moved on. Everyone moved on, except Bernard. He remembered Caroline as she was before everything broke apart. Soft-spoken, but strong kind, in a way that didn't announce itself, the kind of woman who noticed the invisible people in a room. She used to touch his arm when he worked too long and say, "Bernard, you're still human. Don't forget that." After she was gone, he stopped being human. He buried himself in work, deals, meetings, flights across continents. The Asiedu Group expanded rapidly: logistics, real estate, ports, infrastructure. His name appeared in business magazines. Politicians sought his favor. Charities praised his donations. But at night, when the house went quiet, Bernard would sit alone with a glass of untouched wine and stare at nothing. Sometimes he dreamed of Caroline. In those dreams, she never spoke. She only looked at him, sad, disappointed, as if he had failed some test he never knew he was taking. "Sir, your schedule for today." Bernard's thoughts snapped back as Kojo Badu, his longtime security chief, stood respectfully at a distance. "Yes," Bernard said flatly. "Let's hear it." Kojo listed meetings, inspections, a charity visit to a local market district later that afternoon. Bernard nodded through it all, barely listening. When Kojo finished, he hesitated. "You haven't eaten," Kojo said carefully. "I'm not hungry. You say that every day." Bernard turned toward the window, his reflection faint against the glass. "Then stop asking." Kojo bowed his head slightly and stepped back. He had learned long ago when silence was safer than concern. Downstairs, in another wing of the mansion, Madame Evelyn Asiedu sat at a long dining table sipping tea. She was not Bernard's mother by blood, but by power she might as well have been. She had married Bernard's father when Bernard was young and had ruled the household ever since with iron discipline and polished smiles. To the public, Madame Evelyn was elegance and generosity. To those who knew her well, she was control. She glanced at the empty chair at the head of the table. Still refusing to eat, she asked Linda Asiedu, Bernard's cousin, who scrolled through her phone nearby. Linda smirked. Grief suits him, makes him easier to manage. Madame Evelyn's eyes hardened. "Watch your tone. I'm just saying." Linda replied, shrugging. 5 years is a long time to mourn a dead woman. Madame Evelyn set her teacup down slowly. Caroline's death was unfortunate, but it was necessary. Linda looked up. "And you're certain everything stayed buried?" Madame Evelyn met her gaze. "The past only resurfaces when people lose control, and Bernard has none." That afternoon, Bernard stood on a small platform near the edge of a busy market district, cameras flashing as he spoke about community development and empowerment. His voice was steady, his words were polished, but his eyes wandered. The market was alive, vendors shouting, children running barefoot, women bargaining loudly. Life raw and unfiltered. It reminded him of something, though he couldn't place what. For a brief moment he felt unsettled. He dismissed it as exhaustion. Later that evening, back in his office, Bernard opened a drawer he rarely touched. Inside was a single object, Caroline's wedding ring. He picked it up, turning it slowly between his fingers. The gold was worn thin from years on her hand. "I tried," he whispered, though he wasn't sure to whom. A knock came at the door. "Yes." Kojo stepped in holding a file. "Sir, there's something you should see." Bernard frowned. "What is it?" "It's nothing urgent," Kojo said carefully. "Just something unusual from the charity team. They mentioned a woman at the market today. She caused a small disturbance." Bernard's heart beat once, hard. "Why are you telling me this?" Kojo hesitated. "Because they said she looked exactly like Mrs. Asiedu." The room went still. Bernard laughed, once sharp and humorless. "That's not funny." "I know," Kojo replied quietly. "That's why I didn't laugh." Bernard stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. "Caroline is dead." "Yes, sir." "Then don't bring her name into nonsense." Kojo lowered his head. "Understood." But after Kojo left, Bernard could not sit back down. That night, sleep refused to come. His mind replayed memories. Caroline's smile, her voice, her hands resting on her stomach that last month before she disappeared. He remembered an argument with Madame Evelyn about heirs, about control, about bloodlines. He remembered Caroline crying quietly in the bathroom one night, and for the first time in 5 years, a thought crossed his mind that terrified him. What if the story I was told was not the truth? Bernard pushed the thought away. Dead was dead. Buried was buried. Yet somewhere far from his quiet mansion, in a cramped room near the market, Caroline Asiedu lay awake too, listening to the breathing of her twin sons, Alpha and Adnan, and praying that the past would never find them, because if Bernard ever truly saw them, everything would fall apart. Caroline Asiedu woke before the sun. She always did. The small room she rented behind the market had no clock, but her body knew the rhythm of survival better than time itself. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of dried fish dust and yesterday's sweat. A thin curtain separated her from the outside world, where early vendors were already dragging wooden tables across the ground. She sat up slowly, careful not to wake the 2 small bodies curled against her. Alpha slept with his fist tucked under his chin, his brows always slightly furrowed, as if even in dreams he was solving problems. Adnan, softer by nature, clung to her wrapper, his breathing light and uneven. Caroline watched them for a long moment. 5 years. 5 years of hiding. 5 years of pretending she did not exist. 5 years of loving them quietly, fiercely, without complaint. She reached out and brushed her fingers across their foreheads. In the dim light, it still stunned her how much they looked like him. The same nose, the same brow, the same shape of the lips when they slept. "Please," she whispered to no one, "let today pass like the others." She stood, washed her face from a plastic bowl, and tied her faded scarf tightly around her head. By the time the boys stirred awake, she was already smiling. Mama Adnan murmured. "I'm here," Caroline said softly. "Always." She handed them each a piece of dry bread she had saved from the night before. They ate without complaining. They had learned early that hunger was not something to argue with. Outside, the market roared to life. Caroline took her place near a corner stall selling small packets of groundnuts and boiled corn. On bad days, she begged. On better days, she sold just enough to buy one proper meal. People saw her every day, yet no one truly saw her. To most, she was just another poor woman with children, unremarkable, forgettable. That anonymity was her shield. "Mama C," a familiar voice called. Mama Abena approached slowly, her back bent with age but her eyes still sharp. She carried a basket balanced effortlessly on her head. "You didn't sleep," the old woman said, studying Caroline's face. Caroline smiled weakly. "I slept enough." Mama Abena snorted. "Lies don't fool old bones." She handed Caroline a small bundle of tomatoes. "Sell these too. No arguments." "Thank you," Caroline whispered, her throat tightening. Mama Abena had found her 5 years ago, half dead, bleeding, terrified. She had asked no questions. She had simply helped. Kindness like that left a debt Caroline could never repay. As the morning passed, Caroline felt a strange unease settle in her chest. She couldn't explain it. The air felt heavier, the market louder. Her eyes kept drifting to the road beyond the stalls where expensive cars never came. Alpha noticed. "Mama," he said quietly, "are we moving again?" Caroline froze. "Why would you ask that? You look like when we left the other place," he replied. She knelt to his level and held his shoulders. "No, we're not moving, but I promise," she said quickly, too quickly. Alpha nodded, but the doubt remained in his eyes. Around midday, the crowd thickened. People whispered, heads turned. Caroline felt it before she saw it, the shift in attention, the sudden respect mixed with fear. A black luxury car had stopped at the edge of the market. Her heart slammed violently against her ribs. No, not here, not now. She pulled the boys closer instinctively. Men in suits stepped out first. Then a tall figure emerged from the back seat. Caroline did not need to see his face to know who it was. Her body remembered him. Her blood remembered him. Bernard Asiedu. She turned away immediately, lowering her head, pressing Alpha and Adnan behind her skirts. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. Don't look, don't breathe, don't exist. But fate did not listen to prayers. She felt it the moment his presence drew closer, the weight of his shadow, the silence that followed his steps. Then it happened. A gasp, sharp, involuntary. Caroline's breath caught. She knew that sound. It was the sound Bernard made when something struck him so deeply his body reacted before his mind. She squeezed her eyes shut. Mama Adnan whispered. It's nothing, she lied, her voice breaking. Close your eyes. But it was already too late. Bernard stood frozen a few steps away, staring not at her but at the boys, at Alpha, at Adnan, at two living mirrors of himself. The world blurred, sounds faded. Bernard's mind screamed impossible while his heart whispered truth. Caroline felt his gaze finally land on her, slow, heavy, unbelieving. She lifted her head despite herself. Their eyes met. For a second that stretched into eternity, time stopped. Bernard's face drained of color. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Car! He breathed the name breaking apart on his tongue. Caroline stood abruptly, her movements frantic. She grabbed the boy's hands. Come, she said urgently. Now! She pushed through the crowd, ignoring murmurs shoving past stalls. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear Alpha calling her name. Bernard took a step forward. Wait! The word echoed uselessly. Before he could follow, Kojo appeared at his side, instinctively blocking him. Sir! Did you see them? Bernard demanded hoarsely. The children. Did you see their faces? Kojo said quietly. I did. Bernard's hands shook. That woman, he whispered. She looked exactly like my wife. Kojo said nothing. From the corner of the market, Caroline ran until her lungs burned. She didn't stop until she reached the narrow alley behind Mama Abena's stall. She collapsed against the wall, clutching her chest. Alpha stared at her, frightened. Mama, who was that man? Caroline swallowed hard. No one, she said. But her eyes betrayed her. Mama Abena appeared moments later, breathless. Caroline, you must leave. Today. Caroline shook her head, tears spilling freely now. I can't. I'm tired of running. Mama Abena gripped her arms firmly. That man wasn't just anyone. I know, Caroline whispered. And those children, the old woman glanced at the twins, they are the reason he will not forget. Caroline knelt before Alpha and Adnan, cupping their faces. Listen to me, she said, her voice trembling but firm. No matter what happens, stay close to me. Do you understand? Yes, Mama, they said together. As night fell, Bernard sat alone in his car, staring at nothing. The image of those boys burned behind his eyes. And somewhere deep within him, something long buried had begun to claw its way back to life. The truth was no longer silent. It was awake. That night, Bernard Asiedu did not return home. The driver asked twice if he should head back to the mansion, but Bernard answered neither time. He sat in the back seat, his body rigid, his mind racing faster than the city lights streaking past the window. Two faces haunted him, small, brown-skinned, identical. Children who carried his eyes, his brow, his blood. No, he muttered under his breath. It's not possible. Yet the more he tried to deny it, the more his memory betrayed him. 5 years ago, back when Caroline still laughed easily, back when the house felt warm. Bernard remembered the first night Caroline told him she was pregnant. They had been standing on the balcony, the city glowing beneath them. I don't know how to say this without shaking, she had said softly. He turned to her, smiling. Then, don't say it, just show me. She had taken his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. He had laughed then, laughed in disbelief and joy, and pulled her into his arms. Later, when the doctor confirmed it was twins, Bernard had lifted Caroline off the hospital floor, spinning her around until she screamed and begged him to stop. But not everyone celebrated. Madame Evelyn's reaction had been immediate and cold. Twins complicate things, she said flatly when Bernard told her. There are children, Bernard replied, confused. What is there to complicate? Madame Evelyn's lips curved into a thin smile. Inheritance is never simple. That was when the arguments began. Caroline tried to stay out of them at first. She avoided the dining room. She kept her head down. She told Bernard not to worry. But Bernard worried anyway. One evening, he came home early and found Caroline crying quietly in their bedroom. She said, "I'm a risk," Caroline whispered through tears, "that I don't understand the kind of family I married into." Bernard held her tightly. "You are my family." But the pressure grew heavier with each passing week. Linda Asiedu began visiting more often. She smiled too much, asked too many questions about the pregnancy. "How are the babies?" she'd ask lightly. Still kicking, Caroline would nod, forcing a smile, unaware of how closely Linda watched her. Then came the night of the rain. The memory hit Bernard like a fist. Caroline had called him earlier that evening, her voice tense. "I need to talk to you," she said. "Something doesn't feel right. I'll be late," Bernard replied distractedly. "Let's talk tomorrow." Tomorrow never came. Instead, there was a phone call, an accident, a river, no body, but signatures, documents, doctors who spoke confidently. Bernard squeezed his eyes shut in the car. "What if I was wrong?" he whispered. "What if I trusted the wrong people?" Across the city. Caroline sat on the floor of her tiny room, rocking back and forth as Alpha and Adnan slept beside her. Her chest ached. She hadn't planned for Bernard to see them. She had spent 5 years making sure that moment never happened, and now it had. She remembered the night clearly. Linda had insisted on driving her home, saying Bernard was busy. "It's raining too hard for you to go alone," Linda had said sweetly. Caroline hesitated. Something in her stomach twisted. "I'll call Bernard," she said. "No need," Linda replied quickly. "It's family business. Trust me." The road was dark, the rain relentless. Then the argument. "You don't belong in this family," Linda snapped suddenly. "You were a mistake." Caroline barely had time to react before the car swerved violently. The impact, the scream, the water closing over her head. Caroline remembered waking up in pain, her body lodged against rocks, her legs barely responding. She remembered hands pulling her from the water, strangers frightened, unsure. And then Mama Abena's face. "Breathe," the old woman had whispered. "You will not die today." Caroline touched her stomach instinctively. "My babies," she cried. Please, against all odds, they survived. When Caroline later learned she had been declared dead, fear consumed her. Madame Evelyn's name hung over everything like a curse. She knew what powerful families could do to inconvenient truths, so she disappeared. She gave birth quietly. She chose survival over justice. Now survival was no longer enough. In his office the next morning, Bernard stared at Kojo. "I want everything he said. Hospital records, phone logs, witnesses. I want to know who signed what." Kojo nodded. "And the woman," Bernard hesitated. "If she is Caroline." His voice cracked. "Then those children are mine." Kojo lowered his gaze. "Then the truth will not stay hidden for long." At the mansion, Madame Evelyn received a call. Bernard was asking questions. Her fingers tightened around the phone. "Linda," she said calmly after hanging up, "we may have a problem." Linda's face paled. "He saw her, didn't he?" Madame Evelyn's eyes hardened. "Then we must act before memories become evidence." As the city slept uneasily that night, the past crept closer to the surface. Love, betrayal, blood, and the lie that had lasted 5 years was beginning to crack. The rain that night had fallen like judgment. Not the gentle kind that cleansed the streets, but the furious kind that blurred headlights, swallowed sound, and erased the line between accident and intention. Caroline remembered every second of it. She had sat in the passenger seat of Linda Asiedu's car, her hands resting protectively over her swollen stomach as the windshield wipers struggled to keep up. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating Linda's face in sharp flashes. Tight jaw, eyes fixed forward, fingers clenched around the steering wheel. "You're driving too fast," Caroline said softly. Linda didn't answer. The silence pressed down on Caroline's chest heavier than the rain. "I said you're driving too fast," she repeated, this time louder. Linda finally spoke, her voice cold and stripped of its usual sweetness. "Do you know what you are, Caroline?" Caroline frowned. "What do you mean? You are an inconvenience," Linda snapped. "A disruption to plans that were made long before you showed up with your poor background and your unwanted womb." Caroline's heart began to race. Linda stopped the car. "Do you think Bernard really chose you?" Linda continued, her words sharp as glass. "You were never meant to stay. You were just a phase." "Stop the car!" Caroline shouted. The steering wheel jerked violently. The world spun. Caroline screamed as the car skidded tires, losing grip on the wet road. For a split second she saw the guardrail rush toward them, then nothing but darkness as the car burst through and plunged into the raging water below. The impact stole her breath. Cold swallowed her whole. Her body slammed against metal pane, exploding through her spine and legs. Water rushed in faster than she could scream. Panic clawed at her throat as she fought to free herself. My babies! That thought cut through the terror like a blade. She kicked blindly, her lungs burning her hands, scraping against twisted metal until something gave way. The current dragged her under, slammed her against rocks, tore at her clothes. She did not know how long she fought, only that she refused to stop. When she finally surfaced coughing and choking, her body was barely responsive. Strong hands pulled her from the water, voices shouting, panicked, distant. Is she alive? She's breathing. She's pregnant. Oh God, everything faded after that. Caroline woke briefly in a dimly lit room that smelled of antiseptic and damp clothes. Pain screamed through her body. She tried to move but couldn't. A man in a white coat stood over her, his expression unreadable. She won't make it, someone said nearby. She's lost too much blood. Another voice added. Caroline forced her eyes open. My babies, she whispered. The doctor hesitated. Then somewhere behind him a calm, firm voice spoke. She will live. Caroline turned her head weakly and saw Madame Evelyn Asiedu standing near the doorway, dry, composed, untouched by the chaos. She will be declared dead. Madame Evelyn continued evenly. And this incident will be closed. The doctor swallowed. Madam, I will handle the paperwork, Madame Evelyn said. Do your part. Caroline tried to speak, tried to scream, but the darkness claimed her again. When Bernard received the call, it was already too late. By the time he arrived at the private hospital, the room was quiet. Too quiet. A doctor, Dr. Kwame Boateng, stood waiting, hands folded in front of him. I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Asiedu, the doctor said solemnly. Your wife did not survive the accident. Bernard stared at him. Where is she? Dr. Boateng hesitated. The river made recovery difficult. Let me see her, Bernard demanded. Madame Evelyn stepped forward smoothly. There is nothing to see. Do you want to remember her like this? Broken Bernard's knees weakened. She was pregnant, he whispered. Madame Evelyn placed a hand on his shoulder. Sometimes God's plans are beyond us. A death certificate was signed that night. A funeral arranged days later, an empty coffin lowered into the ground as rain fell once again. Bernard stood rigid as soil covered the casket, his mind numb, his heart hollowed out. He never knew Caroline had woken again, this time in a back room behind a market stall, her body wrapped in blankets that smelled of herbs and smoke. Mama Abena leaned over her, tears streaking down her weathered face. You are alive, the old woman said firmly. Do you hear me? You are alive, Caroline cried weakly, her hands trembling as she touched her stomach. They're gone, she sobbed. My babies. Mama Abena shook her head. No, they are fighters, just like their mother. Weeks passed in a blur of pain and fear. Caroline learned the truth slowly, that she had been declared dead, that powerful people wanted her erased, that her survival was dangerous. When the twins were born prematurely, Caroline screamed through the pain with a ferocity born of defiance. Alpha came first, small but strong. Adnan followed, quieter, fragile but breathing. Caroline held them both, sobbing uncontrollably. I will protect you, she whispered, even if the world forgets me. And the world did forget her. Bernard retreated into himself after the funeral. He trusted the signatures, the authority, the calm certainty of those around him. He did not question. He did not investigate. He buried his grief and turned it into ambition. But now, 5 years later, standing on the edge of truth, Bernard felt sick with guilt. In his office, he stared at the death certificate laid out on his desk. Dr. Kwame Boateng's signature stared back at him. So clean, Bernard murmured. So final. Kojo stood beside him. Too clean, sir. Bernard looked up. What do you mean? Kojo pointed to a line. No body, no post-mortem photographs, no witness statements attached. Bernard's jaw tightened. Get me Dr. Boateng, he said quietly. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Madame Evelyn paced her room for the first time in years. Bernard was digging. Linda sat stiffly on the couch. We did what you said, she insisted. The doctor signed. The papers went through. Yes, Madame Evelyn replied coldly, but lies rot when exposed to light, and Caroline Linda asked nervously. Madame Evelyn's eyes darkened. If she truly survived, then she made a very dangerous mistake. That night, Caroline lay awake beside her sons, listening to the market quiet down. She pressed her lips to Alpha's forehead, then Adnan's. "I tried to disappear," she whispered into the darkness. But the past has eyes. Outside, somewhere in the city, Bernard Asieru picked up his phone and made a call that would change everything. "I want the truth," he said into the receiver, "no matter who it destroys." The lie that had protected the powerful for 5 years was cracking wide open. And this time there would be no river deep enough to bury it. Caroline learned what it meant to be invisible. Not all at once, but slowly, day by day, choice by choice, until her old life felt like a story that belonged to someone else. After the twins were born, Mama Abena moved Caroline out of the back room near the river and into a narrow space behind her market stall. It was safer there, hidden among sacks of onions and crates of dried peppers. People came and went every day, faces changing, noise constant. No one lingered long enough to ask questions. That was the point. "Alive women get hunted," Mama Abena said one evening as she mashed herbs for Caroline's aching legs. "Dead women are forgotten." Caroline understood the truth of those words immediately. She did not register the babies at any hospital. She paid a midwife in cash, no names, no records. She chose names that carried strength and prayer rather than legacy. Alpha because he would be a beginning, not an heir. Adnan because God listens. Every decision Caroline made after that was shaped by fear. Fear of being seen, fear of being recognized, fear that someone somewhere was still watching. At night, when Alpha cried and Adnan struggled to breathe, Caroline bit down on her lip to keep from screaming for help. She learned how to calm them with touch alone, how to wrap them tight enough to keep them warm, how to pray quietly so even God would not draw attention. There were moments she almost broke. Once when Alpha was barely a year old, he developed a fever that burned through his small body like fire. Caroline ran from stall to stall, begging for medicine, her voice hoarse, her arms shaking. "No hospital," Mama Abena warned her firmly. "If they write your name, it will come back to you." Caroline spent the night pressing wet cloths against Alpha's skin, whispering his name over and over, bargaining with heaven. "If I must disappear forever," she sobbed, "let him live." By morning, the fever broke. Caroline sank to the floor exhausted and laughed through her tears. That was when she understood something deep and frightening. She was alone in this world, but she was not powerless. Years passed. Alpha grew into a sharp-eyed child who watched everything. He noticed patterns, moods, danger. Adnan grew softer but no less observant, his kindness shining even when food was scarce. They never asked about their father. Caroline made sure of that. When other children spoke about their fathers, Caroline would distract them with chores or stories. When they pointed at rich men passing by in shiny cars and asked questions, she redirected gently. "Some people have money," she would say. "Some people have love. We have enough." Still, the resemblance became impossible to ignore. Market women whispered, "Those boys, have you seen their faces? They look like someone important. Are you sure she's just a poor woman?" Caroline learned to move frequently. She changed markets, changed routes, changed where the boys slept at night, but running takes a toll. By the 5th year, exhaustion lived in her bones. On the day Bernard saw them, Caroline had already been at the market for 6 hours. Her head throbbed, her legs felt weak. She had told herself she would rest the next day. Next days never came. After the encounter, Caroline did not return to the room behind Mama Abena's stall. She took Alpha and Adnan to a cramped space at the edge of the city near a mechanic's yard where noise never stopped. "If they look for us at the market," she told Mama Abena, "they won't think to look there." Mama Abena's eyes filled with tears. "You can't keep running forever, my child." Caroline held her hands. "I know, but just a little longer." That same night, Bernard sat in his office surrounded by files, hospital records, phone logs, old financial transfers. Kojo stood quietly nearby, watching Bernard's face harden with each page he turned at. "This one," Bernard said, tapping a document. "Why would my stepmother authorize payment directly to a private ward the night Caroline died?" Kojo leaned closer. "She said she wanted privacy." Bernard scoffed. For a woman she despised? He flipped another page. And this Dr. Kwame Boateng received a bonus that same week, off the books. Kojo exhaled slowly. "Sir, this wasn't just negligence." Bernard closed the file. "It was a decision," he said coldly. The weight of guilt pressed down on him heavier than any boardroom failure he had ever faced. "I should have questioned it," he muttered. I should have fought harder. Kojo met his eyes. You were grieving. They used that. Bernard stood abruptly and walked to the window, his reflection staring back at him, older, sharper, broken in places he had ignored. And now, Kojo asked. Bernard's voice was quiet but firm. Now I find her, Mrs. Asiedu, Kojo clarified. Yes, Bernard replied, and my children. Across the city, Caroline lay awake, listening to the hum of engines and distant laughter. Alpha slept restlessly, tossing from side to side. Adnan clutched her arm tightly, as if sensing danger even in sleep. Caroline stared at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. She knew Bernard would not forget what he saw. Men like him didn't. She thought of the years she had survived without him, without his money, without his protection. She thought of how much pain had come from his family. And yet, a part of her heart still remembered the man who once held her belly and laughed in pure joy. That memory hurt the most. Mama Alpha whispered, suddenly half asleep, Yes, my son, are we hiding from someone? Caroline swallowed hard. She pulled him closer. We're just being careful, she said softly. Will we stop being careful one day? Caroline closed her eyes. I don't know, she admitted. Outside, somewhere between darkness and dawn, two paths were moving toward each other. One driven by guilt and truth, the other by fear and survival. And when they finally collided, there would be no place left to hide. Bernard Asiedu returned to the market the next morning. Not with cameras, not with charity banners, not with a convoy of black cars announcing his presence. This time he came quietly. He wore a plain shirt, dark glasses, and left his watch behind. Only Kojo Badu accompanied him, standing a few steps back, alert but silent. Bernard wanted to see the place the way Caroline had seen it for years, raw, crowded, and different. But Caroline was not there. The corner where she had knelt the day before was empty. Another woman sold groundnuts now. Different voice, different face. Same dust. Bernard felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. She ran, he said quietly. Kojo nodded. That means she's afraid, and that means she knows who I am, Bernard replied. They walked slowly through the market. Bernard studied every woman with children, every pair of small boys that passed. None of them were them, yet the image would not leave him. Alpha's sharp, searching eyes. Adnan's softer gaze, so painfully familiar. Bernard stopped walking. Kojo, he said, his voice low, when you saw them yesterday. Did you think the same thing I did? Kojo hesitated only a second. Yes, sir. Bernard exhaled sharply. Then it wasn't my imagination. No. They left the market without finding her, but Bernard's resolve only hardened. Back at his office, Bernard called Zainab Sul. She answered on the second ring. Mr. Asiedu. This is unexpected. I need your help, Bernard said plainly, and I need discretion. Zainab paused. You know I don't do quiet favors. I know, Bernard replied. That's why I called you. An hour later, Zainab sat across from him, her eyes sharp, her recorder untouched on the table. You're asking me to investigate a death declared 5 years ago, she said slowly. A woman officially buried. Yes. And you believe she's alive. I've seen her. Zainab studied his face. And the children, Bernard's jaw tightened. They are mine. That got her attention. If you're wrong, she warned, this will destroy your reputation. Bernard met her gaze steadily. If I'm right, it will destroy my family. Zainab leaned back. I'll start with the hospital. That evening, Caroline packed again. She folded their few clothes carefully, her movements automatic. Alpha watched silently from the corner. Are we leaving again? He asked. Yes, Caroline said, forcing calm into her voice. Because of the man, Adnan asked softly. Caroline froze. What man, she asked, though she already knew. The tall one, Adnan said, with the sad eyes. Caroline sat down heavily. You shouldn't remember him, but I do, Adnan replied. He looked like us. Alpha's gaze sharpened. Mama, he said slowly, is he our father? The word hit her like a blow. No, she said too quickly. Don't ask that again. Alpha didn't argue, but the question lingered between them like smoke. That night, Caroline barely slept. Every sound outside made her heart jump. Every passing shadow felt like pursuit. She held the boys close, whispering prayers she had memorized in fear. By morning, she made a decision she had avoided for years. She would not run farther. She would hide smarter. Caroline took the boys to Pastor Samuel and Lovu's small church on the outskirts of the city. The building was old, the paint peeling, but the pastor's eyes were kind. "I was told you help people who need to disappear," Caroline said quietly. Pastor Samuel studied her face, then the boys. His expression softened. "Yes," he said, "but hiding always comes with a price." "I've been paying it for years," Caroline replied. Meanwhile, Bernard's investigation began to move faster than he expected. Zainab called him late that night. The hospital records were altered, she said, without preamble. Key files missing, witness logs incomplete. Bernard closed his eyes and the doctor said, "Kwame Boateng transferred assets shortly after your wife's death." Zainab continued. "Property. Cash. Offshore." Bernard's hand clenched into a fist. "And my stepmother?" he asked. Zainab hesitated. "Her name appears more than once." The silence that followed was heavy. "Find her," Bernard said finally, "before they do." But Madame Evelyn was already moving. She sat in her private study phone pressed to her ear, her expression calm but lethal. "He's digging," she said, "and he's close." The voice on the other end responded softly. "Do you want her silenced?" Madame Evelyn paused. "No," she said slowly. "Not yet. Dead women raise questions. Alive women can be discredited." Linda sat nearby, her hands shaking. "What if the children are proven to be his?" Madame Evelyn's eyes flicked toward her. "Then we remind Bernard who controls his world." The next morning, Bernard received a message, an anonymous photo, blurry, taken from a distance. It showed Caroline walking with the twins near the old church. Bernard's breath caught. "They found her," Kojo said grimly. "No," Bernard replied, standing abruptly. "I did." Within minutes, Bernard was on his way. Caroline was inside the church when she felt it again, that same tightening in her chest, the sense that the past was stepping closer. She looked up just as the door opened. Bernard stood there. No suit, no guards, no power display, just a man. Their eyes met across the quiet room. Alpha and Adnan turned slowly, curiosity written all over their faces. Caroline's heart thundered. "Please," she said softly, her voice trembling, "don't say anything." Bernard took one careful step forward. "I'm not here to take them," he said hoarsely. "I just want to know the truth." Alpha stepped slightly in front of Caroline without realizing it. Bernard noticed. Something inside him broke. "Are they—" Bernard's voice failed him. Caroline shook her head fiercely. "You don't get to ask that." Bernard swallowed hard. "Then let me ask this instead." He looked at the twins, at their faces, their posture, their eyes. "Did I bury my wife?" While she was still alive, Caroline's silence was answer enough. The church felt suddenly too small to contain the truth pressing against its walls. And outside, unseen forces far darker than grief were already closing in. The silence inside the church was heavy enough to crush breath. Bernard Asiedu stood frozen just inside the doorway, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Caroline remained where she was, one hand resting protectively on Adnan's shoulder, the other gripping Alpha's arm as if the boys might vanish if she loosened her hold. Pastor Samuel watched them both, sensing the storm, without understanding its full shape. "You shouldn't have come here," Caroline said finally, her voice low but shaking. "This place was never meant to hold your world." Bernard swallowed. "I didn't come as that man," he said quietly. "I came as someone who lost everything, and may have lost it twice." Alpha's eyes never left Bernard's face. He studied him the way a child studies something dangerous but fascinating. "You look like us," Alpha said suddenly. Caroline stiffened. "Alpha!" "It's okay," Bernard interrupted softly, raising a hand. "He's right." The boy tilted his head. "Are you sick? You look tired." Bernard felt his throat tighten. "I've been tired for a long time." Adnan leaned closer to Caroline, whispering, "Mama, is he angry?" "No," Bernard answered before she could. "I'm not angry. That was only half true." Inside him, emotions collided violently, grief, guilt, rage, relief, all fighting for space. Pastor Samuel cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should sit," he suggested gently. Caroline hesitated, then nodded. They moved to a wooden bench near the altar. Bernard remained standing, unsure if he deserved to sit in her presence. "I won't stay long," Caroline said, her eyes never leaving the boys. "Say what you came to say." Bernard took a breath. "I need to know who declared you dead." Caroline's fingers tightened. "Why?" "Because I trusted them," Bernard said bitterly. "And if I was wrong, then I helped erase you." Caroline's laugh was short and hollow. "Helped, Bernard? You buried me." The words cut deeper than any accusation. "I didn't know," Bernard said hoarsely. "I swear to you, I didn't know." Caroline looked at him, then really looked at him, and saw the cracks in his armor, the guilt that had hollowed his eyes, the man who had believed lies because believing was easier than fighting his own family. "It doesn't change what happened," she said quietly. "I begged God not to let them find me. And now you're here." "I'm not your enemy," Bernard said, "but they are." Outside the church, a black car slowed briefly before moving on. Neither Bernard nor Caroline saw it, but Madame Evelyn's network never slept. Back at Bernard's office, Kojo was pacing. He had received a call moments earlier, short-coded, urgent. "They know," Kojo muttered. "They know you found her." At the mansion, Madame Evelyn stood before a mirror, adjusting her scarf with calm precision. "She survived," she said into the phone, "and now Bernard has seen her." A pause. "Yes," she continued. "Proceed carefully. No public mess. If she speaks, she must sound unstable." Linda's voice trembled from the other end of the room. "What about the children?" Madame Evelyn turned slowly. "Children can be explained away." Back at the church, Bernard leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "I'm investigating the hospital," he said. "The doctor, the paperwork, everything." Caroline's face drained of color. "Stop, I can't." Bernard replied. "Not now. You don't understand." Caroline whispered urgently. "If you push them, they won't just come for me. They'll come for the boys." Bernard's chest tightened. "I won't let that happen. You couldn't stop them before." Caroline shot back. The truth stung because it was undeniable. Bernard closed his eyes briefly. "Then let me try now." Alpha watched the exchange carefully. "Mama," he said softly. "He's scared too." Caroline looked down at her son, tears burning behind her eyes. "Yes," she admitted. "He is." Adnan reached out tentatively and touched Bernard's sleeve. Bernard froze, afraid to move. "Do you know our names?" Adnan asked. Bernard's voice shook. "Alpha and Adnan." The boys exchanged glances. "How do you know?" Alpha asked. Bernard looked at Caroline, silently asking permission. She turned away, unable to speak. "Because," Bernard said carefully, "I've wanted to know you for 5 years." That night, Bernard did not leave the city. He stayed in a small hotel under a false name, replaying every word, every look, every moment in the church. Zainab called just before midnight. "I confirmed it," she said. "The death certificate was falsified. Witnesses paid off. Dr. Boateng is ready to talk." Bernard's heart pounded. "What about Madame Evelyn?" Zainab exhaled. "She's involved deeper than we thought. Financial trails, influence over hospital administration, even police silence." Bernard clenched his jaw. "Then it's war. Be careful," Zainab warned. "She won't fight clean." Across the city, Caroline lay awake beside her sons in a small room behind the church. Alpha whispered, "Mama, is he really our father?" Caroline stared into the darkness. "Yes," she said at last. "He is." Adnan hugged her tightly. "Will he take us away?" Caroline swallowed. "I don't know," but in her heart she knew one thing for certain. The truth was no longer something she could hide behind walls and prayers. It was moving, speaking, and drawing lines. By morning, the battle would no longer be quiet. By morning, the city felt different. Caroline sensed it the moment she stepped outside the small room behind the church. The air was heavier, the silence sharper, as if something unseen had shifted during the night. Alpha and Adnan walked close to her, their shoulders brushing against her wrapper, their eyes scanning everything the way children learned to do when danger had once come too close. Pastor Samuel stood at the doorway, his hands clasped behind his back. "You cannot stay here much longer," he said gently. "Someone came asking questions before dawn." Caroline's heart sank. "Who? A woman?" the pastor replied. "Well-dressed? Polite? Too polite." Caroline didn't need a name. "Madame Evelyn." "Thank you," Caroline said quietly. "For everything." Pastor Samuel nodded. Truth always demands movement. Just be careful where yours takes you. Across the city, Bernard Asiedu sat in the back of his car staring at his phone. Zainab's message still glowed on the screen. Dr. Toy. Boateng agreed to meet. Noon, private location. Kojo watched Bernard's reflection in the glass. Sir, once this becomes public, there's no going back. Bernard didn't look away. There was no going back the moment I saw my son's faces. Kojo hesitated, and Mrs. Asiedu Bernard closed his eyes briefly. Caroline deserves the truth, even if she never forgives me. At the Asiedu mansion, Madame Evelyn sat calmly at her desk signing documents as if nothing in the world had changed. Linda paced the room like a trapped animal. He found her. Linda hissed. He saw the children. This is spiraling out of control. Madame Evelyn set down her pen. Control is not lost yet. What if Caroline speaks? Linda asked. What if the doctor talks? Madame Evelyn's lips curved into a thin smile. Then we shape the story before they do. She reached for her phone. Activate the contingency, she said smoothly. Within hours, whispers began to circulate. A woman claiming to be Bernard Asiedu's dead wife, a mentally unstable beggar, children with no documented birth records, a tragic case of delusion and coincidence. Caroline heard the rumors before she ever saw them. Two women at a roadside stall whispered loudly as she passed. Have you heard one said, that mad woman from the market claims she married a billionaire? Caroline kept walking her back straight, her face unreadable. Alpha clenched his fists. They're lying. Yes, Caroline replied softly, and lies spread faster than truth. By midday, Bernard arrived at the agreed location, a quiet private clinic on the outskirts of the city. Dr. Kwame Boateng sat stiffly in the consultation room, sweat visible along his hairline despite the air conditioning. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Bernard, said his voice calm but cold. Dr. Boateng swallowed. I never wanted things to go this far. Bernard placed the death certificate on the table between them. You signed this, Bernard said, for a woman who is very much alive. Dr. Boateng's hands shook. I was instructed. By whom? Bernard demanded. The doctor hesitated, then exhaled heavily. Madame Evelyn Asiedu. Bernard's jaw tightened. Everything, yes, Dr. Boateng admitted. The declaration, the missing body, the silence. I was paid to close the case. Bernard leaned back slowly, the weight of confirmation settling in his chest like iron. Were there children? Bernard asked quietly. Dr. Boateng nodded. She was pregnant. Twins. They survived. Bernard closed his eyes. Across the city, Caroline packed again, but this time she wasn't running blindly. She met Zainab Sul in a small cafe, the twins sitting between them with cups of water. Zainab studied Caroline carefully. They're trying to paint you as unstable. Caroline smiled sadly. I expected that. Do you have proof? Zainab asked. Caroline reached into her bag and pulled out a small worn envelope. Inside were photos Mama Abena had insisted she keep, hospital bracelets, dates, names, a faint fingerprint smudge from the night the twins were born. I kept everything, Caroline said, just in case the dead ever needed to speak. Zainab nodded slowly. This changes everything. That afternoon, Bernard confronted Madame Evelyn. He stood in her study, the walls that once symbolized power, now feeling suffocating. Did you know she lived? Bernard asked. Madame Evelyn didn't flinch. I knew she survived, and you let me bury her. Bernard said, his voice shaking with controlled fury. I protected this family. Madame Evelyn replied calmly. From scandal, from weakness. You tried to kill my children, Bernard snapped. They were threats, she said coldly. Uncontrolled bloodlines. Bernard stared at her, seeing her clearly for the first time. You are no longer my family, he said. Madame Evelyn's smile faded. Careful, Bernard. You owe everything you are to this house. No, Bernard replied. I owe everything I failed to protect. By evening, the story broke. Not rumors, not whispers. Facts. Zainab's article went live across national media. Billionaire's wife declared dead while alive. Hospital records, falsified, family implicated. Photos followed. Dates, documents, witnesses. Carolyn's face appeared not begging, not broken, but standing tall with Alpha and Adnan at her side. The public reaction was immediate. Shock, anger, outrage. Madame Evelyn's phone rang non-stop. Linda locked herself in her room sobbing. Bernard sat beside Caroline in a quiet room, the twins asleep between them for the first time without fear. I never stopped loving you, Bernard said quietly, but I stopped fighting when I should have fought hardest. Caroline looked at him, her eyes tired but clear. Love that doesn't protect becomes silence, and silence almost killed us. Bernard nodded. I will spend the rest of my life making this right if you let me. Caroline didn't answer. Outside, sirens echoed faintly in the distance. The truth was no longer hidden, and the reckoning had begun. The city didn't sleep that night. News played on screens in roadside bars, in living rooms, and taxi radios, even from small phones held up by market vendors who paused their work just to listen. A billionaire's wife declared dead while still alive. A powerful family accused of falsifying hospital records. 2 twin boys believed to be heirs. Caroline heard her own name spoken by strangers and felt a cold numbness spread through her body. For 5 years, she had lived like a shadow. Now, she had become a headline. Bernard sat across from her in the quiet room Kojo had arranged, safe, guarded away from the chaos. The place was modest compared to his mansion, but it felt heavier because it held truth instead of luxury. Alpha and Adnan slept on a small mattress pushed against the wall. Their tiny chests rose and fell in slow rhythm, unaware that their existence had just set the entire Asiedu empire on fire. Caroline watched them as if she needed to memorize their peace before it was stolen again. Bernard spoke carefully, like a man approaching a wounded animal. I know you don't trust me, he said. You have every reason not to. Caroline's eyes stayed on the boys. Trust is expensive, she replied softly, and I've been poor for a long time. Bernard flinched at the words. I didn't choose this, he said, voice thick. I didn't know they declared you dead while you were alive. Caroline finally looked at him. And what did you know, she asked, calm but cutting. You knew your family hated me. You knew they talked about my pregnancy like it was a threat. You knew I was afraid, and still you left me alone that night. Bernard's throat tightened. I was at a board meeting, a government contract negotiation. You were busy, Caroline finished for him bitterly, and my life was the price. Bernard's eyes glistened, but he didn't look away. You're right. Silence filled the room. Then Caroline's voice dropped to a whisper. I saw Madame Evelyn at the hospital, she said. Bernard stiffened. You saw her, yes. Caroline nodded slowly. When I woke up, I heard her voice. She told the doctor I would be declared dead, like she was ordering a meal. Bernard's hands trembled. Why didn't you tell me? Caroline laughed softly, the sound exhausted. Tell you from where? The river. The back of Mama Abena's stall. Bernard, I had no phone, no money, no proof. Even if I screamed, your world would have called me a liar. Bernard lowered his head. And the children, he whispered. Why hide them from me? Caroline's eyes softened for a fraction, then hardened again. Because they would have killed them, she said simply, or taken them and raised them to hate me. I chose the only option that kept them breathing. Bernard looked toward the sleeping twins, pain twisting his face. I missed everything. Yes, Caroline replied. You did. A knock came at the door. Kojo stepped in, his expression tense. Sir, we have a problem. Bernard stood immediately. What is it? Kojo held up his phone. Madame Evelyn's team is moving. They've contacted police connections. They're pushing a narrative that Caroline is attempting fraud and kidnapping, claiming the children are not yours. Caroline's blood ran cold. They're going to take my sons, she whispered. Bernard's jaw clenched. Not while I'm alive, Kojo continued. Also, Linda is missing. She left the mansion an hour ago. Bernard's eyes narrowed. Missing Kojo nodded. And that makes her dangerous. Caroline grabbed her bag instinctively. We need to leave. Bernard stepped in front of her. No, running is what they expect. I'm done letting them chase you. Caroline's voice shook. You don't understand what your family can do. Bernard met her gaze. I understand enough now. He turned to Kojo. Increase security. Move us to the safe house near the embassy route and call Zainab. Kojo nodded and left quickly. Caroline's hands trembled as she looked at Bernard. You're making this bigger, she whispered. Bigger means blood. Bernard's face softened. It already cost you blood. I won't let it cost you more. As they prepared to move, Alpha stirred awake. Mama, he murmured. Caroline rushed to him. I'm here. Alpha blinked sleepily and looked toward Bernard. Are we going somewhere? Bernard crouched slightly to Alpha's level, keeping his voice gentle. Yes, somewhere safer. Alpha studied him. You're really our father. Bernard swallowed hard. Yes, Adnan's eyes fluttered open too. He sat up slowly, staring at Bernard with quiet curiosity. Will you leave? Adnan asked softly. The question hit Bernard like a stone. He shook his head. I will not leave you. Caroline's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. She had waited 5 years to hear those words. But she didn't know if she could believe them. They moved under cover of night cars, switching routes, Kojo's team watching every corner. Caroline held the twins close, her body tense with every passing streetlight. At the safe house, Bernard received a call. Zainab's voice was urgent. They're escalating, Bernard. Madame Evelyn's camp is pushing for an emergency injunction, claiming you're being manipulated. Bernard's eyes burned. Let them try. And there's something else, Zainab added. We found a witness from the river accident, a fisherman. He says he saw Linda's car that night, and another car following it. Bernard froze. Another car? Yes, Zainab said. The license plate is linked to a security company that used to work for your father. Bernard's hand clenched, so it wasn't just Linda. No, Zainab replied. It was planned. Bernard ended the call and turned to Caroline. It was planned, he said quietly. Your accident was an execution. Caroline's knees weakened. She sat down slowly, her breath catching. All these years, she whispered. I thought I was just unlucky. Bernard knelt in front of her. You were not unlucky, he said, voice breaking. You were targeted. Caroline stared at him, shaking. Then what happens now? Bernard looked at the sleeping twins, then back at her. Now, he said, we stop hiding. We fight, together. Caroline's eyes searched his face for deception, for weakness, for doubt. She found none. But still her heart whispered the same fear it had carried for years. When powerful people lose control, they don't just fight, they destroy. And somewhere in the city, Linda Asiedu sat in a dark car, staring at a small vial in her hand, her face twisted with panic. If she couldn't silence the truth, she would silence the ones carrying it. The safe house felt like a place suspended between worlds. Outside, the city roared with speculation and anger. Inside, the air was tight with fear, strategy, and decisions that could not be undone. Bernard Asiedu stood by the window watching headlights cut through the darkness. Every car that slowed made his muscles tense. Every unfamiliar sound pulled his thoughts back to the same question. How far would his family go to protect their lie? Caroline sat on the couch, Alpha's head resting on her lap while Adnan slept curled against her side. She stroked their hair gently, her eyes never fully closing. 5 years of hiding had trained her body not to relax. Kojo entered quietly, his expression grim. We have confirmation, he said. Linda Asiedu was seen near the eastern bypass 2 hours ago. She's not alone. Bernard turned sharply. Who is she with? 2 men, Kojo replied. Private security, off the books. Caroline's hand froze mid-stroke. She's coming for us, she whispered. Bernard moved closer. Not without consequences. Kojo hesitated. Sir, there's something else. Bernard nodded. Say it. The fisherman Zainab mentioned the witness from the river. He's willing to testify publicly. But he's scared. Someone tried to buy his silence this evening. Bernard's jaw tightened. And if money doesn't work? Kojo didn't answer. The implication hung heavily in the room. Caroline looked up slowly. This is how it always happens, she said softly. They erase people. Bernard crouched in front of her. Not this time. She searched his face. You can't protect everyone, Bernard. I can try, he replied, and this time I won't look away. At that moment, Alpha stirred and opened his eyes. Mama, he murmured, then noticed Bernard nearby. Is something wrong? Caroline forced a smile. Nothing you need to worry about. Alpha frowned slightly. You always say that when something is very wrong. Bernard felt a tightness in his chest. You're very observant, he said gently. Alpha shrugged. You have to be. Adnan shifted closer to Bernard without realizing it, his small hand brushing Bernard's knee in his sleep. Bernard froze, afraid to move. Caroline noticed, and for a brief second something fragile passed between them. Before either could speak, Bernard's phone buzzed. Zainab. He stepped into the next room and answered immediately. They're moving fast, Zainab said without greeting. Madame Evelyn's lawyers filed an emergency petition. They're claiming Caroline manipulated you and that the children are part of an extortion attempt. Bernard laughed bitterly. Of course they are. There's more. Zainab continued. Someone leaked a psychological evaluation from years ago, altered but convincing. They're painting her as unstable. Bernard closed his eyes. They're attacking her credibility. Yes, Zainab said. And if they succeed, the court will hesitate to listen to anything she says. Bernard's voice hardened. Then we change the battlefield. How? We don't let Caroline speak first, Bernard replied. We let the evidence speak. Zainab paused. You're thinking criminal charges. Yes, Bernard said. Attempted murder, falsification of death, conspiracy. That will implicate your stepmother directly, Zainab warned. Bernard didn't hesitate. Good. After the call ended, Bernard returned to the room. They're going after you, he told Caroline plainly. Your sanity, your character. Caroline nodded slowly. I expected that. But you're not alone anymore, Bernard added. And tomorrow we stop playing defense. She studied him. What are you planning? Bernard took a breath. A press conference. Caroline's eyes widened. No. Yes, Bernard said firmly. I will stand in front of the country and say the words they never thought I would. Caroline shook her head. That will make us targets. Bernard lowered his voice. We already are. Silence followed. Finally, Caroline spoke, her voice steady but quiet. If you do this, there's no going back. Bernard met her gaze. I know. She looked down at her sons, then back at him. Then, tell the whole truth, she said, not just the parts that make you look brave. Bernard nodded. I will. Across the city, Linda Asiedu sat in the back seat of a parked car, her hands trembling around her phone. Her breath came in shallow bursts. They're pushing charges, she hissed into the receiver. Bernard's gone mad. Madame Evelyn's voice was calm on the other end. Then you must stay calm too. I can't, Linda whispered. This was never supposed to explode like this. You were told what to do. Madame Evelyn replied coolly. And now you will do it. Linda's eyes darted to the glove compartment. I didn't sign up for prison, she said shakily. No, Madame Evelyn replied. You signed up for loyalty. The call ended. Linda stared at the dark street ahead of her, tears streaming down her face. At the safe house, Caroline finally slept, if only for a short while. She dreamed of the river again, but this time hands reached for her not to pull her under, but to lift her up. When she woke, dawn light filtered through the curtains. Bernard was still awake. We should talk to the boys, Caroline said quietly. Bernard nodded. They deserve honesty. Alpha listened intently as Caroline explained in simple words that people were angry because they didn't like the truth. Are they angry at us? Adnan asked. No, Bernard answered gently. They're angry because they lied. Alpha looked thoughtful. Lies always make people angry when they stop working. Bernard almost smiled. As the morning wore on, security tightened around the safe house. Kojo coordinated with trusted officers outside the Asiedu network. By midday, the city buzzed with anticipation. Word had spread Bernard Asiedu was going to speak. Caroline stood beside him as he adjusted his jacket, her heart pounding. Whatever happens, she said softly, thank you for not turning away this time. Bernard looked at her. I turned away once, he said. It cost me everything. Outside, cameras waited. Inside, a family stood on the edge of truth and consequence. And somewhere in the shadows, the last pieces of a carefully constructed lie were beginning to collapse under their own weight. The press conference was scheduled for noon. By 10 in the morning, the street outside the media center was already packed. Reporters, camera crews, protesters, curious onlookers. Some held signs demanding justice. Others shouted Bernard's name with anger, betrayal, or desperate hope. Inside a quiet room backstage, Bernard Asiedu stood in front of a mirror, adjusting his cufflinks with steady hands that did not reflect the storm inside him. Caroline sat nearby Alpha and Adnan, between her and the wall, coloring silently on sheets Kojo had brought to distract them. Their small voices hummed softly, unaware of how close the world was to tearing itself apart. You don't have to stand beside me, Bernard said quietly without turning around. You can watch from another room. Caroline shook her head. I stood alone for 5 years. I'm not doing it again. Bernard met her gaze in the mirror. He nodded once. A knock came at the door. 5 minutes, Kojo said. The room tightened. Caroline leaned down and kissed the boys' foreheads. No matter what you hear out there, remember this, Mama loves you, and nothing can change that. Alpha looked up. Even if they shout, yes, she smiled faintly. Even then. Adnan hugged her waist. "We won't be scared." Bernard crouched in front of them. "You don't have to be brave today," he said gently. "Just be yourselves." They nodded solemnly. When Bernard stepped onto the stage, the noise outside exploded. Cameras flashed. Voices shouted questions before he even reached the podium. "Mr. Asiedu, is it true your wife is alive? Did your family cover up an attempted murder? Are those children really yours?" Bernard raised his hand. The room slowly fell silent. "My name is Bernard Asiedu," he began, "and today I am not here as a businessman. I am here as a husband who failed his wife and a father who failed his children." A murmur rippled through the crowd. 5 years ago, Bernard continued, his voice steady. "My wife, Caroline Asiedu, was declared dead after a car accident. I trusted the documents. I trusted the doctors. I trusted my family." He paused. "I was wrong." Gasps echoed. "Caroline survived," he said. "She survived an attempt on her life. She survived being erased, and she survived alone while I mourned an empty coffin." Behind the curtain, Caroline's knees trembled. She held Alpha and Adnan tighter. Bernard took a breath. "Today, I confirm that the death certificate was falsified. Hospital records were altered, and yes, members of my own family were involved." The room erupted. "What proof do you have?" a reporter shouted. Bernard gestured. Screens behind him lit up with documents, bank transfers, hospital logs, signatures. Dr. Kwame Boateng's confession played in audio form. The fisherman's recorded testimony followed. Each piece hit like a hammer. "My wife was pregnant at the time of the attack," Bernard said, his voice breaking for the first time. "She gave birth to twin boys, Alpha and Adnan. They are my sons." The noise became deafening. Bernard raised his hand again. "I am filing criminal charges against all parties involved, regardless of blood or name." In the back of the room, Madame Evelyn watched from a private feed, her face pale, for the first time in years. "This is madness," Linda whispered beside her. "No," Madame Evelyn replied quietly. "This is exposure." Back at the press conference, Bernard stepped aside. Caroline walked forward. Her hands shook slightly as she took the microphone, but her voice did not. "My name is Caroline Asiedu," she said. "For 5 years I lived as a dead woman." The room fell silent. "I didn't disappear because I wanted to," she continued. "I disappeared because I was hunted, because powerful people decided my life and my children's lives were inconvenient." She looked directly into the cameras. "I am not unstable. I am not confused. I am a survivor." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing. "I never wanted revenge," Caroline said. "I wanted safety. I wanted my children to grow up breathing. If telling the truth cost me peace, then peace was never real." She stepped back. The press conference ended in chaos, questions shouted, cameras flashing, reporters scrambling. Within minutes, the story went global. Outside, protesters surged forward, some chanting for justice, others shouting accusations. Inside a courthouse downtown, emergency motions were filed. Arrest warrants were drafted. By evening, Dr. Kwame Boateng was taken into custody. An hour later, Linda Asiedu was stopped at a border checkpoint, trembling and incoherent. Madame Evelyn was summoned for questioning. She sat in her mansion's living room, hands folded, watching the news replay Bernard's words. "He chose them," she murmured. "He chose weakness." When officers arrived at her gate, she did not resist. Caroline watched from a secure room as footage of the arrests played on television. Her chest felt tight, not with joy, but with something heavier. "It's happening," she whispered. Bernard stood beside her. "Yes." And after this, she asked quietly, "What happens after justice?" Bernard didn't answer immediately. Outside, sirens echoed. Somewhere in the city, Mama Abena watched the news from a small radio, tears streaming down her face. "The dead have spoken," she whispered. That night, Alpha asked a simple question. "Does this mean we can stop running?" Caroline knelt in front of him, her eyes shining. "Yes," she said, "I think it does." But even as the city celebrated truth, Caroline felt a quiet ache. Justice had a price, and healing, she knew, would cost even more. The courtroom was packed long before the judge entered. Journalists filled every bench, notebooks open, cameras ready. Observers whispered in low tones, trading fragments of rumor and disbelief. Outside, crowds gathered behind police barriers, chanting Caroline's name, some in support, others in fury. Inside, the air was thick with expectation. Caroline Asiedu sat upright beside her legal counsel, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a simple dress, nothing flashy, nothing expensive. Her calm unsettled people more than tears ever could. Alpha and Adnan were not present. Bernard had insisted they remain somewhere safe, somewhere quiet, where their childhood would not be measured by court transcripts. Across the room, Madame Evelyn Asiedu sat rigidly, her posture perfect, her face unreadable. Linda Asiedu sat 2 rows behind her eyes, darting shoulders, hunched already looking smaller than the woman she once thought herself to be. Bernard sat alone on the opposite side. For the first time in his life, he was not protected by family alignment or corporate shields. He was simply a man waiting for the truth to finish its work. "Court is in session," the clerk announced. When the judge entered the room, rose. Proceedings began swiftly. The prosecution laid out the charges: conspiracy to commit murder, falsification of medical records, obstruction of justice, abuse of power. Each count landed with a weight that pressed down on the room. The first witness was Dr. Kwame Boateng. He walked to the stand slowly, shoulders slumped, the confidence he once wore like a coat now gone. "I falsified the death certificate," he said plainly. "I did so under pressure and financial incentive." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. "Who instructed you?" the prosecutor asked. Dr. Boateng swallowed. "Madame Evelyn Asiedu." Madame Evelyn did not react. "Did anyone else participate?" the prosecutor continued. "Yes," Dr. Boateng replied. Linda Asiedu arranged the logistics of the accident. Private security ensured there were no witnesses. Linda buried her face in her hands. Bernard closed his eyes. The fisherman testified next, his voice trembling as he described the night of the crash, the rain, the 2 cars, the sudden swerve. "I thought it was just an accident," he said. "But then I saw the second car stop and drive away." Gasps filled the room. Financial records followed. Phone logs, security footage from a nearby toll gate that showed Linda's car, followed closely by another vehicle registered to a company connected to the Asiedu estate. Each piece fit perfectly. Then it was Caroline's turn. She stood when her name was called, walking to the witness stand with steady steps. She did not look at Madame Evelyn. She did not look at Linda. She looked straight ahead. "Please tell the court what happened after the accident," the prosecutor said. Caroline took a breath. "I woke up in pain," she began. "I couldn't move. I heard voices. One of them said I wouldn't survive. Then I heard Madame Evelyn. The courtroom stilled. She said I would be declared dead." Caroline continued calmly. "She spoke as if my life was already finished." Madame Evelyn's lawyer objected immediately. "Hearsay." The judge raised a hand. "Overruled. The witness may continue." Caroline described everything: the river, the rescue, Mama Abena, the birth of the twins in hiding. She did not dramatize. She did not cry. Her restraint made the truth sharper. "And why did you not come forward sooner?" the defense attorney asked, stepping in. Caroline met his gaze. "Because I was afraid my children would be killed." The attorney scoffed lightly. "That's speculation." "No," Caroline replied evenly. "That is experience." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gallery. When Bernard was called to testify, he stood slowly, his movements heavy with regret. "I believed my family," he said. "I trusted power instead of people. And because of that, my wife almost died and my sons grew up without a father." He turned slightly, facing the judge. "I'm not asking for mercy for them," Bernard said. "I'm asking for justice for her." Madame Evelyn finally reacted. "This is betrayal," she snapped, suddenly rising to her feet. "After everything I built." "Sit down," the judge commanded sharply. Madame Evelyn's composure cracked. "You think this woman is innocent?" she shouted, pointing at Caroline. "She married into power she didn't understand. She threatened everything. She threatened nothing." The judge interrupted. "You did." Silence fell like a blade. By the end of the day, the verdict on preliminary rulings was clear. Madame Evelyn Asiedu was denied bail. Linda Asiedu collapsed into tears as she was escorted away in handcuffs. Outside, the crowd erupted, some cheering, others stunned into quiet. Inside a private hallway, Bernard stopped Caroline as she prepared to leave. "It's not over yet," he said softly. "I know," Caroline replied, "but for the first time, it's moving in the right direction." Bernard hesitated. "After this, whatever you decide, I will accept it." Caroline studied him for a long moment. "You're learning," she said. "That's something." That night the city buzzed with one word: conviction. and somewhere far from the noise, Alpha and Adnan slept peacefully, unaware that the walls closing around the lie that nearly erased them were finally irreversibly falling. The fall of the Asiedu dynasty did not happen in one loud crash. It happened in silence, the kind of silence that follows a storm when people step carefully around the wreckage, unsure of what can be salvaged and what must be buried forever. Madame Evelyn Asiedu spent her first night in detention staring at a blank wall, replaying Bernard's words over and over in her mind. For decades she had ruled with certainty, believing fear was the strongest form of order. Now fear had finally turned its face toward her. Linda Asiedu, in a separate holding cell, sobbed until her throat burned. She remembered the night of the rain, the moment she turned the wheel, the scream that followed, the certainty that everything would disappear beneath water. She had believed power would protect her. It hadn't. Across the city, in a quiet, guarded residence far from cameras and crowds, Caroline sat at a small table with Alpha and Adnan eating breakfast. It was an ordinary moment, and that was what made it extraordinary. No rushing, no hiding, no scanning the door with every sound. Alpha poured water carefully into his cup, his tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. Adnan hummed softly as he ate, swinging his legs. Caroline watched them as if afraid the calm might shatter if she blinked. Mama Alpha said suddenly, "Can we go outside today?" The question stopped her breath. Outside. She swallowed. "Yes," she said carefully. "We can." Adnan grinned. For real, Caroline replied, smiling back. Bernard stood nearby, leaning against the wall, watching the exchange quietly. He had stayed awake most of the night, not from fear this time, but from something unfamiliar, anticipation mixed with humility. He cleared his throat gently. "There's a park not far from here," he said. "It's quiet, secure." Caroline studied his face. 5 years ago she would have followed him anywhere without question. Now, trust came in smaller steps. "That's fine," she said after a moment, "but we go together." Bernard nodded. Of course. The park was modest, a few trees, a cracked walking path, old swings that creaked with age. But to Alpha and Adnan, it might as well have been a palace. They ran ahead, laughing, their voices ringing out freely for the first time in their lives. Caroline sat on a bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Bernard sat beside her, leaving a careful space between them. "I've ordered a full audit of the Asiedu group," he said quietly. "Every account, every board member, anyone connected to what they did to you." Caroline nodded. "That's good. And the mansion," Bernard continued. "I don't live there anymore." She glanced at him. "Why?" "Because too many lies were built into its walls," he replied. "I don't want the boys growing up inside that." Caroline looked back at Alpha and Adnan, who were now arguing loudly over whose turn it was on the swing. "They don't need wealth," she said softly. "They need safety and honesty." Bernard's voice dropped. "I know." There was a pause. Then Caroline spoke again, her tone careful. "The court will likely rule in my favor," she said. "But that doesn't mean I owe you reconciliation." Bernard nodded. "I don't expect it." She studied him. "Do you understand what forgiveness costs?" He met her eyes. "I'm starting to." In the days that followed, the country watched as the final pieces fell into place. Madame Evelyn was formally charged and remanded pending trial. Linda, under pressure, agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her confession filled in gaps even the investigators hadn't expected. The Asiedu Group's board dissolved. Assets were frozen. Investigations spread outward like ripples in water. But Caroline stayed away from the noise. She focused on smaller things, helping Adnan learn to tie his shoes, listening to Alpha explain the rules of a game he had invented, teaching them how to cross the street without fear. One evening, Bernard arrived carrying a small folder. "I spoke to a counselor," he said gently. "For the boys, and for us, if you want." Caroline hesitated. "And if I don't, then I respect that." Bernard replied, "I'm done forcing outcomes." She took the folder slowly. "That's new," she said. He smiled faintly. "I'm learning." That night after the boys fell asleep, Caroline stood by the window watching city lights blink in the distance. Bernard joined her, keeping his voice low. "There's something else," he said. "The court will likely restore your legal status, your name, your rights." Caroline nodded. I want my name back. You have it, Bernard said. And if you want, my surname doesn't have to mean power anymore. It can just mean family. Caroline turned toward him fully. You don't get to rewrite the past, she said quietly. I know, Bernard replied. But maybe we can write something smaller, slower. She searched his face for the man who once chose meetings over her fear. She saw him, and she saw the man standing in front of her now older, stripped of certainty but finally listening. I won't promise you anything, Caroline said. Not love, not marriage, not forgiveness. Bernard nodded. I understand. But she continued. I won't deny the boys their father. Bernard's breath caught. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Caroline added. Be worthy first. He smiled, soft, genuine. I will try every day. Weeks later, the court delivered its ruling. Caroline Asiedu was officially declared alive. The death certificate was voided. Her marriage was legally recognized. Alpha and Adnan were declared Bernard's sons under the law. The judge's final words echoed through the courtroom. Truth delayed is not truth denied. Outside, people cheered. Others cried. Some stood silently absorbing the weight of what justice looked like when it finally arrived. That evening, Caroline took Alpha and Adnan home to a modest house Bernard had purchased far from the old estate. No guards at the gate, no marble floors, just rooms filled with light. Alpha ran from room to room laughing. This one can be my thinking room, Adnan claimed the window seat immediately. Caroline stood in the doorway, overwhelmed. Bernard stood beside her. Is it okay? She nodded slowly. It's enough. As night fell, Caroline tucked the boys into bed. Mama Adnan whispered sleepily, We're not hiding anymore, right? She kissed his forehead. No, my love. We're home. Bernard watched from the hall, his heart full and fragile at the same time. The empire was gone, but in its place stood something quieter, something real. The house felt different at night, not silent in the way the mansion once had been cold and echoing, but quiet in a way that breathed, the kind of quiet that came from people finally sleeping without fear. Caroline moved softly through the hallway, checking on Alpha and Adnan one last time. Alpha slept on his back, one arm flung above his head, his face relaxed in a way she had never seen before. Adnan slept curled to the side, his thumb tucked under his chin, breathing slow and even. For the first time in 5 years, Caroline did not feel the urge to wake them just to be sure they were still there. She closed their door gently. In the living room, Bernard sat on the floor with a stack of papers spread around him, not contracts or financial statements, but drawings. Crayon pictures the boys had made that afternoon, stick figures with 4 people holding hands, a sun in the corner, a house with uneven windows. Caroline watched him for a moment without announcing herself. He looked different, not powerful, not commanding, just present. They gave me homework, Bernard said quietly, noticing her reflection in the window. Apparently, I have to learn how to draw myself with better hair. Caroline smiled despite herself. Good luck with that. He chuckled softly, then grew serious. I spoke to my lawyers today. Caroline leaned against the doorway. That sounds dangerous. Bernard nodded. I'm stepping down as CEO. The words landed gently but firmly. Caroline studied him. Temporarily, no. Bernard replied. Completely. She straightened. Why? Because the company was built on silence, he said, and silence has cost us too much. He gathered the drawings carefully and set them aside. I'm transferring control to an independent board, Bernard continued. And I'm funding a foundation for victims of abuse of power, medical cover-ups, people who were erased the way you were. Caroline's throat tightened. You don't have to do this. I do, Bernard said simply. Not to prove anything, but because it's the only way I know how to live with what I failed to stop. She crossed the room and sat across from him on the floor. You're changing, she said quietly. He met her gaze. I know change doesn't earn forgiveness. No, Caroline replied, but it earns possibility. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the distant hum of the city. Finally, Bernard spoke again. There's something I need to say, he said, and I need you to hear it without answering right away. Caroline nodded. Go on. I loved you, Bernard said. Before the power, before the fear, before the mistakes. Caroline's chest tightened. And I still love you, he continued, but I understand now that love without protection is just words. So I'm not asking you to come back to me as my wife. She held her breath. I'm asking to earn the right. Bernard finished to be in your life at whatever distance you decide. Caroline looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood. Bernard's heart sank slightly, but he stayed where he was, honoring his promise not to force outcomes. Caroline walked to the window, staring out at the quiet street. When she spoke again, her voice was steady but raw. For 5 years, she said, I survived on instincts you never had to develop. I learned to listen for danger in footsteps. I learned how to make food stretch. I learned how to be both mother and shield. Bernard listened without interruption. I don't know who I am without fear yet, Caroline continued, and I don't know who you are without power. She turned to face him. So I won't give you an answer, she said. Not today. Bernard nodded slowly. That's fair. But Caroline added, I will give you a chance. His breath caught. A chance to show up, she said, not with promises, with presence. I can do that, Bernard said softly. She walked back toward the hallway. Then start tomorrow. Alpha wants to learn how to ride a bike. Adnan wants someone to read to him before bed. Bernard smiled, eyes shining. I'll be there. The next morning, sunlight poured into the house. Alpha stood outside with his small bicycle helmet slightly crooked, his face determined. You have to run with me, Alpha instructed Bernard, but don't let go until I say so. Bernard laughed nervously. Understood. Caroline watched from the porch as Bernard jogged behind the bike, one hand gripping the seat, the other hovering anxiously. I'm ready, Alpha shouted. Bernard hesitated. Are you sure? Yes. Bernard let go. The bike wobbled, then steadied. Alpha pedaled forward, eyes wide with disbelief, then joy. I'm doing it, he screamed. Adnan clapped wildly. You're flying! Bernard stood frozen, heart pounding, watching his son ride freely for the first time. Caroline felt tears sting her eyes. Later that evening, they ate dinner together at a small table. No servants, no formality. Just food, laughter, and spilled water. As Bernard cleared the plates, Adnan looked up at him seriously. You're not going to disappear, right? Bernard knelt beside him. No. Ever. Adnan pressed. Bernard glanced at Caroline, then back at the boy. Not if I can help it. Adnan nodded, satisfied. That night, after the boys were asleep, Caroline sat alone on the couch. Bernard joined her, careful to keep space. You did well today, she said. He smiled faintly. So did you. She took a breath. People think justice ends when the court speaks. Caroline said, but healing doesn't follow a verdict. Bernard nodded. I know. Caroline looked at him, and neither does love. The words hung between them not as a promise, but as an opening. Outside, the city continued on, busy, imperfect, alive. Inside that modest house, something fragile and real was being built, not from power, but from truth, not from fear, but from choice. And for the first time in a very long time, Caroline Asiedu believed that the future did not need to be hidden. Sometimes the most painful stories are not about evil strangers, but about familiar faces who chose power over love, silence over truth. Caroline's journey reminds us that survival is not weakness. It is courage in its rawest form. She did not survive because she was protected. She survived because she refused to let fear erase her children's right to exist. This story teaches us that truth may be delayed, but it is never defeated. Lies can wear expensive clothes. They can sign documents, control hospitals, and rewrite history. But truth has something stronger: time. And when the time comes, even the most powerful walls cannot hold it back. Bernard's transformation reminds us of another hard lesson: love without action is not love at all. Regret alone does not heal wounds. Accountability does. Growth does. Choosing to stand on the side of truth, especially when it costs comfort, status, and legacy, is the beginning of redemption. And finally, this story shows us that healing is not instant. Forgiveness is not owed. Trust is not automatic. Real families are not rebuilt by grand speeches, but by daily presence, humility, and consistency. If this story touched you, we'd love to hear from you. What part of Caroline's journey moved you the most? Do you believe people can truly change when faced with the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters here. And if you believe in stories that reveal karma, compassion, and the power of truth stories that remind us what it truly means to be human, please subscribe to this channel. More emotional, meaningful stories are coming, and we'd be honored to have you with us on this journey.